A 6-year-old girl named Tricia stood crying in a Florida Denny's parking lot while her father Marcus grabbed her arm violently enough to leave marks. And when Josh the Ripper Coleman, a Hells Angels member who'd survived the same childhood terror 35 years earlier, watched through the restaurant window, he made a choice that would lead to courtroom battles, death threats, and a public confrontation that forced an entire community to stop looking away. He walked outside and whispered 6 words that would transform 3 lives forever. Before we dive into this story, where are you watching this from right now? Drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this message reaches across America. Wifey is threatening to close my account. Don let her. So hit that subscribe button. Now, let's get into the story. Josh the Ripper. Coleman had learned 3 truths in 48 years of surviving things that should have killed him. Rangers don't leave people behind. Some wounds never fully heal. But you ride through the pain anyway, and the hardest battles aren't the ones you fight overseas. They're the ones you fight in parking lots on Sunday mornings, when everyone else pretends not to see. The 3rd truth was why he sat in a corner booth at the Denny's on Dale Mabry Highway in Tampa, nursing black coffee and a Grand Slam breakfast, watching through grease-stained windows as a custody exchange turned into the kind of scene that made his hands shake with rage he'd spent 30 years learning to control. He'd earned his road name the Ripper in Kandahar when an IED detonated under his Humvee, shredding both legs and killing 2 of his brothers. And he'd dragged himself and a wounded specialist named Torres out of the burning wreckage on legs doctors said would never walk again. Spent 18 months in rehab proving them wrong. Got medically discharged with a Purple Heart, chronic pain, PTSD that made sleep a negotiation with nightmares, and the understanding that his real war hadn't been against insurgents. It had been against the version of himself that wanted to give up. He'd found the Hells Angels Tampa chapter at his lowest point, when whiskey and painkillers were starting to look like solutions instead of problems. And brotherhood had saved him the way it saved most veterans who came home to an America that thanked them for their service but didn't know what to do with the damage. But before Kandahar, before the army, before he'd learned that courage could be taught but trauma was earned, Josh had been a scared kid in Fort Myers with a father who believed discipline meant bruises and control meant terror. Raymond Coleman had been a respected insurance executive who wore suits and smiled at church and came home drunk enough to teach his son that real men didn't cry, didn't complain, and definitely didn't tell anyone what happened behind closed doors. Josh's mother had tried to leave twice. Both times his father had used lawyers, custody agreements, and the family court system to drag them back. And every visitation, every custody exchange had been another opportunity for Raymond to remind them who was in charge. Josh remembered parking lots exactly like this one. Remembered his mother's desperate voice trying to calm him while his father's rage escalated. Remembered strangers looking away, pretending not to see, choosing comfort over intervention. He'd been 8 years old when he'd finally understood. Nobody was coming to save him. He'd have to survive until he was big enough to fight back. Which was why, when he saw the little girl in the pink dress, maybe 6 years old, blonde pigtails, white sandals, begging, "Mommy, please, I don't want to go with Daddy. He scares me." Josh felt 30 years collapse into this moment. The mother, blonde, 30s, exhausted eyes that said this wasn't the first time, held the girl's hand gently, trying to explain something in a voice made for calming frightened children. The father, expensive suit, red face, aggressive posture, yelled loud enough that even through restaurant glass, Josh heard the fury. He couldn't hear the words. Didn't need to. He'd heard that tone before in his own father's voice, in the voices of drill sergeants who thought volume was leadership, in the voices of men who believed anger proved strength. Then Marcus, Josh would learn his name later, grabbed the girl's arm hard enough that even from 50 feet away, Josh saw her flinch, saw tears, saw the tiny body go rigid with the fear prey shows when predators strike. The mother tried to intervene. Marcus shoved her back with his free hand, not hard enough to knock her down, but hard enough to communicate ownership. And the little girl screamed, not loud, but the kind of scream children make when they've learned that loud screaming makes things worse, so they scream small and hope someone hears anyway. Nobody moved. Not the family loading into their minivan 20 feet away. Not the elderly couple walking toward the restaurant entrance. Not the teenager on his phone who definitely saw but chose TikTok over intervention. Just another Sunday morning in America where people witnessed abuse and decided it wasn't their business, that surely someone else would handle it, that getting involved might be dangerous or complicated or awkward. Josh the Ripper Coleman, who'd survived explosions, failed surgeries, childhood terror, and the kind of PTSD that made him wake up swinging some nights, set down his coffee with hands that had started trembling the way they always did when his past collided with his present. He'd told his therapist at the VA that he was managing his triggers. Told his brothers at the clubhouse that he was doing fine. Told himself that intervening in other people's problems was how you ended up in jail or dead. But there were some lies even he couldn't make himself believe. Because he'd been that little girl 35 years ago. Different gender, different parking lot, same terror. And nobody had intervened for him. Nobody had stood between him and his father and said enough. He'd sworn that if he ever witnessed it happen to someone else, he wouldn't be one of the cowards who looked away. Josh stood, his knees protesting. Old injuries never fully healed, they just learned to cooperate, and grabbed his Hell's Angels cut from the seat beside him. Pulled it on slowly, feeling the weight of the patches. Tampa across the bottom rocker, the death head center patch, veteran and 22 on the sides, and across his back in letters that had taken 3 years to earn, Hell's Angels. He dropped $20 on the table for a $12 breakfast because when you were about to do something that might end in arrest, you tipped well. And then Josh Coleman walked out of that Denny's into the Tampa heat, 93 degrees at 10 a.m., humidity thick enough to drown in, toward a custody exchange that had turned into assault, toward a terrified child who needed someone to do what nobody had done for him, toward a confrontation he knew would complicate his life in ways he couldn't predict. Rangers didn't leave people behind. And that little girl crying in a parking lot while her father hurt her and strangers looked away? She was his mission now, whether she knew it or not, whether her family wanted his help or not, whether the law would thank him or arrest him for it. Some battles you fought because they were righteous. This was one of them. The Tampa heat hit like opening an oven door, but Josh barely felt it as he crossed the parking lot toward a scene every combat veteran recognized instinctively, a situation 30 seconds from escalating into violence everyone would regret. Marcus still gripped Trisha's arm with white-knuckled intensity, the little girl crying quietly now. That defeated crying kids do when they've learned screaming makes things worse. Stephanie positioned herself between them, hands raised in surrender posture, voice shaking as she tried negotiation tactics that had probably failed 100 times before. "Marcus, please, you're hurting her. Just let me take her home and we'll reschedule." "I don't need to reschedule my time with my daughter," Marcus snarled, the possessive pronouns doing the work rage couldn't finish. "You're 10 minutes late, again." "You think you can just disrespect the court order?" Josh stopped 5 feet away, close enough to intervene, far enough to give Marcus the illusion of space. "Let go of the kid." His voice carried the flat authority of someone who'd given orders in Kandahar and expected compliance. Marcus's head snapped toward him, sizing him up. Tattooed arms, Hell's Angels cut, scars visible on his neck. The kind of man who looked exactly like the criminals Marcus probably lectured his country club friends about. "This is none of your business. This is a private family matter." "Made it my business when you grabbed a 6-year-old hard enough to leave marks," Josh said, nodding toward the red fingerprints already forming on Trisha's forearm. "That's assault. On a child. In public. So you're going to let go, step back, and we're going to wait for everyone to calm down." Marcus's face flushed darker. "Who the hell do you think you are? I have legal custody. Court-ordered visitation. You can't stop you from seeing your daughter. Can stop you from hurting her while I'm watching." Josh took one step closer, using his height advantage and 20 years of learning how presence could be a weapon. "So here's what's going to happen. You're going to let go. Mom's going to hold her. And we're going to figure this out like adults instead of whatever this is." For a moment, Marcus calculated. Could he take this biker in a fight? Would witnesses side with a businessman in a suit or a tattooed criminal? Would calling the cops help or hurt his case? Josh saw the math happening behind his eyes and added one more variable. "Also, those folks filming on their phones already got you grabbing a crying kid. You escalate this, that video's going to be in court Monday morning. Your choice." Marcus released Trisha like she'd burned him. She immediately ran to Stephanie, buried her face in her mother's legs, and Josh heard her whisper the words that confirmed everything he'd suspected. "Mommy, please don't make me go with him. He hurts you when I'm not looking." Stephanie's eyes filled with tears, not from sadness, but from the desperate frustration of someone who'd been screaming truth into a void for years. "Sweetheart, the judge says—" "Judge doesn't know what happens behind closed doors," Josh interrupted gently. Then he did something that would change all 3 of their lives. He knelt down to Trisha's eye level, always kneel, always show respect, and spoke with the calm certainty of someone making a promise he intended to keep. "Hey there. My name's Josh. What's yours?" "Trisha," she whispered. "Trisha, I'm going to ask you to do something that might sound strange, but I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" She nodded, still pressed against her mother. "I want you to stand next to me and call me Dad, just for right now, just until your real dad calms down and we can figure this out safely. Can you do that?" Trisha looked at her mother, who looked at Josh with confusion and desperate hope. Then Trisha took 3 steps and stood beside Josh, her small hand finding his tattooed forearm. "Okay, Dad." The word came out uncertain, testing, like trying on shoes that might fit. Marcus exploded. "You can't do that. You can't just take my daughter. I'm calling the police right now." "Good," Josh said, standing, Trisha still beside him. "Call them. Let's get some official documentation of what just happened here. Because from where I'm standing, you assaulted a child, shoved her mother, and now you're threatening everyone because someone finally told you no." Sirens cut through the humid Florida air as a Tampa PD cruiser rolled into the parking lot. Someone had already called, probably the Denny's manager who'd watched the whole thing unfold. Josh stayed calm, hands visible, non-threatening posture, while Trisha gripped his leg the same way he'd gripped his mother's leg 35 years ago when his father had raged and nobody intervened. This time, someone had. And whether Marcus liked it, or whether the courts would approve, or whether Josh had just made an enemy with expensive lawyers, he'd done what Rangers did. Refused to leave someone behind, especially when that someone was a 6-year-old who'd just learned that sometimes the scariest looking people are the safest. And sometimes pretending someone's your dad works better than any law the courts could write. Officer Maria Santos stepped out of her cruiser with the weariness of someone who'd responded to 3 domestic calls already that morning and knew this one wouldn't be simpler. She took in the scene with practiced efficiency. Businessman in expensive suit looking outraged, blonde woman holding a crying child, tattooed biker in Hell's Angels colors standing protectively nearby, and at least 4 phones recording from various angles. Domestic situations with witnesses were either easier or more complicated. She'd find out which. "All right, someone want to tell me what's happening here?" Marcus spoke first, voice shifting from rage to victimhood with the skill of someone who'd done this before. "Officer, thank God you're here. This man, this criminal, threatened me and tried to kidnap my daughter during our court-ordered visitation exchange. I have documentation. I have rights. I want him arrested immediately." Santos turned to Josh with the expression cops used when they expected to hear every excuse they'd heard before. Josh stayed quiet, let her assess, then spoke with the calm of someone who had nothing to hide and nothing to prove. "Ma'am, I'm Josh Coleman. I was having breakfast inside when I witnessed this man grab his daughter violently enough to hurt her. Mother tried to intervene. He shoved her. Child was crying, begging not to go with him. I came out to de-escalate before it turned into something worse. He's lying." Marcus's control started slipping again. "He interfered with my custody rights. He told my daughter to call him Dad. That's parental alienation. That's..." "Sir, I'm going to need you to calm down," Santos said, the kind of statement that wasn't a request. She looked at Stephanie. "Ma'am, what's your side?" Stephanie's voice trembled, not from fear, but from finally being asked. "My ex-husband has joint custody despite a history of emotional abuse. Every exchange is difficult. Today he grabbed Trisha's arm when I was 10 minutes late because of traffic. I tried to calm things down. This man," she gestured at Josh, "intervened when Marcus wouldn't let go." Santos looked at Trisha, still standing beside Josh, still gripping his hand. "Honey, are you okay? Did anyone hurt you?" Trisha nodded toward Marcus. "Daddy grabbed me really hard. It hurt. I told him I didn't want to go, but he said I have to because the judge said so. Then Josh said to pretend he's my dad so real daddy would calm down." The simplicity of children's honesty cut through every legal complication. Santos examined Trisha's arm, red marks clearly visible in the shape of adult fingers. Then she turned to the small crowd that had gathered. "Anyone else witness what happened?" 3 people stepped forward. A young mother who'd been loading groceries, an elderly man who'd been walking into Denny's, a teenager who'd filmed the whole thing. Their stories matched. Businessman grabbed child violently, mother tried to help, child was terrified, biker intervened calmly. Santos made notes, took statements, and when she finished, she addressed Marcus with the tone of someone delivering news he wouldn't like. "Mr. Bennett, based on witness statements and visible marks on the child, you could be charged with child abuse. I'm not arresting you today, but I strongly recommend you leave and let your ex-wife take your daughter home. We'll file a report that can be reviewed by family court." Marcus's face went from red to purple. "This is bullshit! I have rights! The court order says..." "The court order doesn't give you permission to hurt her," Santos interrupted. "Sir, leave now or I will arrest you for disorderly conduct and will sort everything else out at the station." Marcus looked at his daughter, at Josh, at the phones still recording, and calculated that retreat was his only option. This isn't over. My lawyer will hear about all of this, especially about him," pointing at Josh, "interfering with my custody." He stalked to his Mercedes, slammed the door, and peeled out of the parking lot with the aggressive driving of someone who'd never faced real consequences. Santos turned to Stephanie. "Ma'am, I recommend filing a report about today's incident. Document the marks on your daughter's arm, and consider requesting a modification to your custody agreement. What I just witnessed suggests supervised visitation might be more appropriate." Stephanie nodded, tears finally falling. "I've tried. His lawyers are expensive. Mine is overworked. The judge keeps saying I need to co-parent better, that I'm alienating Tricia from her father." "Then show them today's video," Josh said quietly. "Show them what co-parenting with an abuser looks like." Santos looked at Josh with the expression cops reserved for complicated situations. "Mr. Coleman, I appreciate you intervening, but be careful. Men like Mr. Bennett have resources. If he decides you're a threat, he'll use every legal weapon he has. Understand?" "Yes, ma'am." Santos handed Stephanie a business card. "Call this number, Victim Advocate. They can help navigate court modifications and get a restraining order if he contacts you outside of court-authorized times." As the officer left and the crowd dispersed, Stephanie looked at Josh with gratitude and confusion. "Why did you help us? You don't even know us." Josh thought about Fort Myers, about his father, about all the parking lots where nobody intervened. "Because I was that scared kid once, and nobody helped. Figure it's time someone did." Tricia tugged his hand. "Are you still my pretend dad?" Josh knelt one more time. "How about we get some pancakes and talk about it? Your mom and I need to figure out what happens next." As they walked back into Denny's, strange family formed by violence and intervention, Josh realized he'd just made an enemy with money and lawyers. But he'd also made a promise to a 6-year-old who'd called him Dad. And Rangers didn't break promises, even the ones they made to strangers in parking lots on Sunday mornings. The coffee shop on Henderson Boulevard wasn't where Josh normally spent his Monday afternoons, but Stephanie had asked to meet somewhere neutral, somewhere they could talk about what happened at Denny's and what it meant for the legal nightmare she'd been living for 3 years. Josh sat across from her in a corner booth, watching Tricia color at a table nearby under the watchful eye of a barista who'd agreed to keep an eye on her while the adults talked. Stephanie had the exhausted eyes of someone who'd been fighting battles with one arm tied behind her back, and when she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of confessions that had nowhere else to go. "Marcus wasn't always like this. When we met, he was charming, successful, said all the right things. It took me 2 years to realize the charm was a mask, and the success meant he could afford lawyers who made problems disappear." She stirred coffee she wasn't drinking. "The abuse started small, controlling what I wore, monitoring my phone, isolating me from friends. By the time Tricia was born, I was terrified of him, but convinced myself it was normal, that all marriages had rough patches." Josh listened the way combat medics listen to wounded soldiers, for what wasn't being said as much as what was. "When did it turn physical?" "When I tried to leave the first time. Tricia was 3. I took her to my mother's house in Clearwater. Marcus showed up with police, said I'd kidnapped his daughter, showed them custody paperwork I didn't know existed. Turned out he'd been preparing for me leaving before I'd even decided to go." She finally looked up, meeting Josh's eyes. "He's smart. Never hits where bruises show, never loses control in public. Yesterday was the first time I've seen him that sloppy. Everything's calculated to make me look unstable while he looks like the concerned father fighting for his daughter. Josh had seen this pattern before. Abusers who weaponized systems designed to protect families. What happened when you finally left? I filed for divorce 2 years ago, asked for full custody, cited emotional abuse, manipulation, Trisha's nightmares. Marcus hired 3 lawyers. They painted me as a vindictive ex trying to alienate a loving father. Brought character witnesses, people from his firm, his church, his country club. Nobody who'd seen what happened behind closed doors. Her voice broke. The judge granted joint custody, said children need both parents, ordered me to attend co-parenting classes. Co-parenting. With a man who threatened to kill me if I ever tried to leave again. Josh felt rage building, the same rage he'd felt watching IEDs kill good soldiers, while bureaucrats debated rules of engagement from air-conditioned offices in D.C. Has he threatened Trisha? Not directly, but she hears him threaten me, sees him destroy things, watches him lose control, and then watch him put the mask back on when anyone else is around. She's 6 years old and already learning that reality is different behind closed doors. Stephanie pulled out her phone, showed Josh documentation, photos of bruises hidden by long sleeves, emails from Trisha's teacher expressing concern about behavioral changes, text messages from Marcus that danced right up to the line of threatening without crossing it legally. Everything that should have mattered but didn't, when Marcus's lawyers argued for maintaining family bonds. Yesterday was the first time someone saw, Stephanie whispered. 3 years of telling doctors, teachers, lawyers, judges that something was wrong. 3 years of being told I'm overreacting, that I need to communicate better, that I'm damaging my daughter by keeping her from her father. And yesterday you saw it in 30 seconds and did what nobody else would do. You stood between him and us. Josh pulled out his own phone and showed her something. A photo from his childhood, faded and creased, showing an 8-year-old boy with a black eye and a forced smile. That's me. My father was Raymond Coleman, insurance executive, pillar of the community, abusive piece of shit who knew exactly how to hide it. My mom tried to leave twice. Both times the court sent us back because fathers have rights and breaking up families is bad for children. He pocketed the phone. I survived because I got big enough to fight back, but I shouldn't have had to survive it in the first place. Nobody should. Stephanie started crying. Not the desperate crying of someone breaking down, but the relieved crying of someone finally being believed. What do I do? His lawyers are already threatening me. They're saying the biker incident proves I exposed Trisha to dangerous people. They're filing for emergency custody modification, claiming I'm unfit. Then we prove Marcus is more dangerous than any biker, Josh said. I've got brothers who know how to document, how to follow, how to build cases when the system fails. You've got video from yesterday showing him assaulting his daughter. We get more evidence, we show the pattern, and we make it impossible for judges to ignore. Why would you do this? Stephanie asked. You don't know us. This could get complicated for you. Josh looked at Trisha coloring peacefully 15 feet away, probably drawing pictures of families that looked safer than hers. Because yesterday, when she called me Dad, something in me recognized something in her. We're both survivors of men who thought ownership was love. Difference is, she's 6. She's got time to heal if someone protects her now. I didn't get that chance. She will. He stood, dropped money on the table. I'm calling a church meeting tonight. Hell's Angels vote on this kind of thing, but I'm voting yes regardless. You in? Stephanie nodded, wiping tears. "I'm in." As Josh left, he texted his VP Brick. Emergency church meeting. 8 p.m. Kid in danger. Need the brothers. Because when a ranger made a promise to protect someone, that promise didn't end when the immediate danger passed. It lasted until the mission was complete. And this mission, protecting a 6-year-old from a man who thought legal custody meant ownership, was just beginning. The Hells Angels Tampa clubhouse on Nebraska Avenue had seen its share of difficult decisions: charity-run planning, veteran support coordination, brotherhood votes that determined who wore patches and who didn't. But Monday night at 8 p.m., 17 brothers gathered for a church meeting about something that transcended club business: whether to go to war with Florida's family court system to protect a child most of them had never met. Josh stood at the head of the scarred oak table, Stephanie beside him looking terrified to be in a room full of tattooed bikers, while Tricia, colored in the corner, watched over by Brick's old lady Maria, who'd volunteered to keep her occupied during adult conversation. Josh explained everything: the Denny's incident, Marcus's history, the custody nightmare, why this mattered, showed them video from the parking lot, documentation of abuse, explained how the system kept handing Tricia back to a man who terrorized her. When he finished, the room stayed silent until Wrench, former Tampa PD detective who'd quit after too many years watching the system fail people, spoke up. "Boss, I know this family. Worked a domestic call at their house 2 years ago when Marcus was still married to Stephanie. She had bruises. He had excuses. I wrote it up as mutual combat because that's what my sergeant told me to do when people with expensive lawyers were involved." Wrench's voice carried shame. "I should have done more. Didn't. This is my chance to fix that." Doc, the club medic and former Army combat lifesaver, added what everyone was thinking. "We help her. We're painting targets on our backs. Marcus sounds connected, rich, the kind of man who uses lawyers like weapons. We interfere, he'll come after the club." "Good," Brick said, the VP whose road name came from being immovable when he'd decided something mattered. "Let him. Because if we don't help this kid, what the hell are we? We spend every November doing Toys for Tots, every March doing veteran suicide awareness rides, every goddamn day talking about brotherhood and protecting the vulnerable. This little girl is vulnerable. Her mom is fighting a system designed to protect abusers. We stand by and do nothing. We're just cosplaying outlaws instead of being what we claim: family to people who need us." The vote was unanimous. 17 hands raised for helping Stephanie and Tricia, 0 against, 0 abstaining. Josh felt something release in his chest, the same feeling he'd felt in Afghanistan. When his unit had voted to go back for a wounded Afghan interpreter, everyone else said wasn't worth the risk. Brotherhood meant showing up, always. Wrench laid out a plan with the precision of someone who'd built cases before. "We need documentation. Every custody exchange filmed, every interaction logged, pattern evidence showing Marcus is dangerous. I'll reach out to contacts at TPD, see what other reports exist that maybe got buried. Doc, you examine Tricia, document injuries. Brick, we set up rotation surveillance during custody times. Make sure Marcus knows he's being watched." "And if he escalates?" Chains asked, the enforcer who'd earned his road name in Ramadi by pulling a helicopter pilot from a burning crash using literal chains. "If he comes violent, we respond proportionally. We're not vigilantes. We're concerned citizens with cameras and military training who happen to care about a kid's safety." Josh's voice carried the authority of someone who'd led men in combat. "But if he touches Stephanie or Tricia again, all bets are off." Maria brought Tricia over. the little girl clutching a drawing she'd made. 17 bikers surrounding a small figure protecting it. Underneath, in careful letters, "Family." She handed it to Josh. "This is you and your friends. You're all really big and scary, but you make me feel safe." Josh took the drawing with hands that had held weapons and dying soldiers, and now held art from a child who'd decided tattooed strangers were safer than the man who'd made her. "Tricia, these men and women are going to make sure nobody hurts you again. That's a promise. And when bikers make promises, they keep them forever." Stephanie, crying for the 3rd time in 2 days, addressed the room. "I don't know how to thank you. I can't pay you. I don't have anything." "Don't need payment," Brick interrupted. "You're family now. That's how this works. When a Hell's Angel decides someone needs protection, they're protected. No conditions, no expiration date." As the meeting broke up and brothers divided surveillance assignments, Josh pulled Wrench aside. "How bad is it legally? Be honest." "Bad. Marcus has money, connections, and a clean public record. You've got priors, bar fights, resisting arrest. Courts see him as stable businessman, sees you as dangerous biker. He plays this right. He could get you arrested for stalking, harassment, a dozen charges that stick just long enough to make you radioactive as a witness." Wrench paused. "But here's the thing. He's arrogant. Guys like him always are. Give him enough rope and he'll hang himself. We just got to be patient and document everything." Josh thought about patience, about the 18 months of rehab after the IED, about the 30 years of healing from his father's abuse, about how the most important battles required endurance more than explosions. Then we're patient, but we don't leave her unprotected for 1 second. That night, as Tampa settled into humid darkness, 3 Hell's Angels positioned themselves near Stephanie's apartment complex in Seminole Heights, not blocking anything, not threatening anyone, just present, watching, making it very clear that Tricia now had guardians who didn't need court orders to care whether she survived childhood. And somewhere in Ybor City, Marcus Bennett sat in his condo drinking expensive scotch, calling his lawyers and making plans to destroy the biker who dared interfere with his property. Because that's what Tricia was to him. Property. Not a daughter. Just something he owned that nobody else could have. He'd learned soon enough that some property fought back, and some property had 17 tattooed angels who'd already voted unanimously that protecting her was worth whatever war came next. Marcus discovered his ex-wife had biker gang protection on Wednesday morning when his private investigator, a former cop named Dennis who specialized in custody investigations for wealthy clients, delivered photos of Hell's Angels outside Stephanie's apartment, outside Tricia's elementary school, outside the coffee shop where Stephanie worked. The report detailed everything. Josh Coleman, president of Hell's Angels Tampa, former Army Ranger, Purple Heart recipient, arrest record including assault and resisting arrest. Known associate of criminal motorcycle organization. The kind of evidence that could bury Stephanie in family court. Marcus called his lawyer Gregory Steinberg at 9 a.m., voice vibrating with vindicated rage. "I told you she was unfit. She's exposing my daughter to gang members, criminals with records. I want emergency custody filed today, full custody, supervised visitation for her. I want Tricia away from those people." Steinberg, who'd made partner at his firm by winning ugly custody cases for rich clients, heard opportunity. "I'll file by noon. Judge Morrison tends to favor stability and traditional family structures. If we frame this as concerned father protecting daughter from mother's dangerous associates, we can force her into supervised visitation while the investigation proceeds." The emergency motion hit Stephanie's lawyer's desk by 2 p.m. Petitioner seeks immediate modification of custody arrangement due to respondent's reckless endangerment of minor child by associating with known criminal organization, Hells Angels Motorcycle Club. Evidence shows respondent has allowed members of said organization, including member with violent criminal history, to have unsupervised contact with minor child, creating demonstrable threat to child's safety and well-being. The hearing was scheduled for Friday, 2 days away. When Stephanie called Josh, sobbing, saying the lawyers were using Sunday's incident against her, using the club's protection as evidence she was unfit, Josh felt the familiar rage of watching the system protect predators. "He's making it look like you're the danger," Stephanie said through tears. "Like protecting us makes you criminals. The motion lists your arrest record, the club's history, everything designed to make me look like I'm putting Tricia in danger by accepting your help." Josh met her at the coffee shop 30 minutes later with Wrench, who'd been researching Marcus's background with the tenacity of someone who'd built cases for a living. "I found something," Wrench said, pulling out a folder. "Marcus has a sealed juvenile record, assault on a girlfriend when he was 17. His parents paid to have it expunged. I've got a source who remembers the case. Girl had a broken arm." "Can we use that?" Stephanie asked. "Not directly, it's sealed, but it shows pattern. Add it to yesterday's assault on Tricia, the domestic call from 2 years ago, and we've got evidence that Marcus's violence isn't new, it's chronic. Judge might not see the sealed record, but the judge can see pattern behavior if we present it right." Josh's phone rang. Brick's name. "Boss, we got a problem. Marcus just showed up at Tricia's school claiming emergency pickup. School called Stephanie to confirm, but he's making a scene. Says bikers are stalking him, that he fears for his daughter's safety, demanding they release her to him immediately." Josh and Stephanie were in the car before Brick finished talking. Tricia's elementary school, Lowry Elementary on South Boulevard, was 15 minutes away through Tampa traffic that felt like hours. When they arrived, Marcus's Mercedes was parked in the fire lane, hazards flashing, and through the school's glass entrance they could see him arguing with Principal Hayes, voice escalating despite the administrator's attempts to calm him. Josh, Stephanie, and Wrench entered just as Marcus pointed at Josh and delivered his rehearsed line. "That is the dangerous criminal I'm talking about. He assaulted me on Sunday. He's stalking my family. He's probably armed right now." Josh stopped walking, raised his hands where everyone could see them, and spoke with the calm of someone who de-escalated situations in war zones. "Mr. Bennett, I'm here because your ex-wife asked me to be here. I haven't assaulted anyone. I'm not armed, and I'm not stalking. I'm standing in a public school at the request of a parent who has every right to pick up her daughter." Principal Hayes, a black woman in her 50s who'd seen enough parental drama to fill libraries, addressed both men. "Gentlemen, I don't care about your personal issues. My concern is this child. Now, Mr. Bennett, according to our records, today is not your custody day. Mrs. Bennett has primary pickup authority. Unless you have documentation saying otherwise, I cannot release Tricia to you. I have a court order." Marcus pulled out papers. The emergency motion, not yet approved by any judge, but looking official enough to intimidate people who didn't read legal documents carefully. "This says my ex-wife is endangering our daughter. I'm exercising emergency parental authority." "That's a motion requesting an emergency hearing," Wrench said quietly, pulling out his own phone to photograph the document. "It's not a court order. No judge has signed it. You're lying to school officials to gain unauthorized access to a child. That's attempted kidnapping, Mr. Bennett. Marcus's face went from red to purple. You don't know what you're talking about. I'm a lawyer. I know my rights. Then you know you're violating them right now, Josh said. The next 15 seconds happened in slow motion. Marcus lunged, not at Josh, but at Principal Hayes, trying to grab the school roster that showed Trisha's classroom location. Hayes stepped back. Josh moved forward on instinct, blocking Marcus without touching him. And Marcus, enraged beyond calculation, shoved Josh with both hands, screaming, "Get out of my way, you criminal piece of shit!" Josh didn't budge, didn't push back, didn't retaliate, just absorbed the shove and said, "That's assault, on camera." He pointed at the school's security camera mounted above them. In front of witnesses, while attempting unauthorized pickup of a minor. Stephanie already had 911 on her phone. "Yes, I'm at Lowry Elementary. My ex-husband is attempting to take our daughter in violation of custody agreement. He just assaulted someone. We need police here immediately." Marcus realized too late he'd been played, lost control in a school, on camera. In front of an administrator who'd document everything, with a former cop watching who knew exactly which laws had just been broken. He backed toward the exit, pointing at Josh. "This isn't over. My lawyers will destroy you. You've just made an enemy you can't afford." "Already had enemies," Josh said quietly. "Survived them in Kandahar. Pretty sure I can survive you in Tampa." As Marcus fled and Tampa PD arrived to take statements, Principal Hayes pulled Stephanie aside. "Mrs. Bennett, I'm filing an incident report. I'm also recommending your ex-husband be banned from campus without prior written authorization. What I just witnessed was a man out of control trying to take a child who isn't safe with him." That afternoon, Stephanie's lawyer filed countermotion to Marcus's emergency request. Respondent seeks denial of petitioner's motion on grounds that petitioner has demonstrated unstable and violent behavior, including documented assault at child's elementary school, attempted unauthorized pickup in violation of custody agreement, and pattern of intimidation tactics. Respondent further argues that her association with Mr. Joshua Coleman and Hell's Angels Motorcycle Club constitutes legitimate protection arrangement necessitated by petitioner's ongoing threats and harassment. The hearing Friday would decide everything. But Josh knew something Marcus didn't. When you make your war public, when you lose control on camera, when you show everyone who you really are, all the expensive lawyers in Florida can't rebuild a mask that's been ripped off, and Marcus had just ripped off his own. Judge Patricia Morrison had presided over family court in Hillsborough County for 16 years, long enough to recognize when fathers fought for children versus when they fought for control, long enough to smell bullshit through the thickest layers of legal filings. Friday morning at 10 a.m., she sat in Family Court 3, reviewing emergency motions from both sides, watching video from Lowry Elementary, and reading incident reports that painted a picture neither lawyer had accurately represented. Marcus sat with Gregory Steinberg, wearing his most expensive suit, projecting wounded father defending his daughter. Stephanie sat with her overworked public defender, Melissa Torres, wearing target clearance clothes and exhaustion. Josh sat in the gallery, not allowed to speak but present as requested by Stephanie's lawyer. Morrison started with the obvious. "Mr. Steinberg, your motion claims Hell's Angels members pose danger to the minor child, but the video I watched shows your client attempting unauthorized school pickup, becoming physically aggressive, and assaulting Mr. Coleman. Want to explain that discrepancy?" Steinberg deployed the strategy wealthy clients paid for. Deflection. "Your Honor, my client was acting out of legitimate fear for his daughter's safety. He'd learned that a convicted criminal with ties to organized crime had been given unsupervised access to his child. His reaction, while perhaps excessive, stems from paternal protective instinct. Paternal protective instinct doesn't include shoving school officials and assaulting people on camera, Morrison said dryly. Ms. Torres, your counter-motion claims Mr. Coleman provides legitimate protection. Against what, exactly? Torres stood, pulling out documentation Wrench had helped compile. Police reports from the Denny's incident showing Marcus grabbed Tricia violently. Witness statements, photos of bruises, the domestic call from 2 years ago, emails from teachers concerned about Tricia's behavioral changes. Your Honor, Mr. Coleman intervened in a public assault on a minor child. Since then, he and his organization have provided surveillance and protection because Mr. Bennett has demonstrated escalating violent behavior. This isn't gang intimidation, it's citizen intervention when the system has failed to protect a child from a documented abuser. Morrison turned to Marcus. Mr. Bennett, I'm looking at 7 documented incidents over 3 years where teachers, counselors, or neighbors expressed concern about your daughter's well-being. Each time, nothing was done. Care to explain? Marcus deployed the Wounded Father Act. Your Honor, my ex-wife has been alienating Tricia from me since the divorce. She coaches her to say negative things. She exposes her to dangerous people to make me look bad by comparison. I'm the stable parent. I'm the one with a clean record, a successful career. Until Wednesday, when you assaulted someone at your daughter's school, Morrison interrupted. That's not a clean record anymore, Mr. Bennett. That's a pattern emerging. Steinberg tried to redirect. Your Honor, Mr. Coleman has arrests for assault, resisting arrest, association with known criminal organization. Surely his presence in this child's life raises concerns about what? Morrison looked at Josh in the gallery. Mr. Coleman, approach. Josh stood, walked to the stand, aware every eye in the courtroom was measuring him. Tattooed arms, Hell's Angels cut, scars visible, exactly what wealthy lawyers wanted judges to fear. Mr. Coleman, why did you intervene Sunday? Morrison asked. Because I watched a man grab a 6-year-old violently enough to hurt her, and I was that kid 35 years ago when my father did the same thing. Nobody helped me. I survived, but I shouldn't have had to. Josh's voice stayed level. So when I saw it happening to Tricia, I did what I wished someone had done for me. I stood between her and violence. And the Hell's Angels? Your criminal record? Arrests, Your Honor, not convictions. Bar fights where I defended myself, resisting arrest when an officer was aggressive during a traffic stop. Nothing involving children, nothing violent toward innocence. Josh met her eyes. Hell's Angels aren't perfect, but we're veterans, fathers, grandfathers. We do Toys for Tots every Christmas. We do veteran suicide awareness rides. We protect people the system forgets. That includes Tricia. Morrison looked at Tricia, sitting with a victim advocate in the hallway visible through the courtroom's glass door. Ms. Torres, I want to hear from the child. Is she available? 5 minutes later, Tricia sat in a chair too big for her, looking at Judge Morrison with the serious expression children wore when adults finally asked what they'd been screaming for years. Tricia, nobody's in trouble, Morrison said gently. I just need you to tell me the truth. Do you feel safe with your dad? Tricia shook her head. Why not? Because he yells really loud and breaks things and makes Mommy cry. And he grabbed my arm and it hurt, and when I said stop, he said I have to listen because he's my father, and judges said so. The courtroom went silent. Do you feel safe with Josh? Tricia nodded enthusiastically. He kneels down when he talks to me, so he's not scary tall. And he said I could call him Dad if it made me feel safe. And he has friends with motorcycles who watch our house so Daddy doesn't come when he's not supposed to. Morrison looked at Marcus, whose mask had slipped completely, showing rage barely contained. "Mr. Bennett, I'm denying your motion. Furthermore, I'm modifying custody arrangements. Visitation suspended pending psychological evaluation. When visitation resumes, it will be supervised at a court-approved facility." Steinberg started to object. Morrison cut him off. "I've seen the video, Mr. Bennett. I've read the reports. I've heard your daughter's testimony. You're a wealthy man with expensive lawyers. But you can't buy your way out of what I just witnessed. A pattern of control, manipulation, and violence. Court adjourned." As Marcus and Steinberg left, Marcus stopped beside Josh in the hallway. "You've destroyed my family, turned my daughter against me. I will make you pay for this." "I didn't turn her against you," Josh said quietly. "You did that yourself. I just stood between you and her long enough for people to notice." That evening, at the Hells Angels clubhouse, 17 brothers plus Stephanie and Tricia celebrated with pizza and soda. Tricia gave everyone drawings she'd made, each biker surrounded by protective light. When she got to Josh, she handed him a picture of a man kneeling beside a child, both smiling. Caption: "My real dad." Josh felt something crack in his chest. The same thing that had cracked in Kandahar when he'd realized he'd survive his injuries. The same thing that cracked when he'd found brotherhood in the Angels. It was hope, scarred and battered, but still alive. "Can I really call you Dad now?" Tricia asked. "Not just pretend?" Josh looked at Stephanie, who nodded through tears. "Sweetheart, it stopped being pretend the moment you stood next to me in that parking lot. Family isn't about blood, it's about who shows up when you need them." And in that Tampa clubhouse, surrounded by tattooed veterans who'd voted unanimously to protect a child they didn't know, Josh the Ripper Coleman learned that the wounds from his childhood didn't disqualify him from being a guardian. They qualified him, because survivors recognized survivors. And sometimes the most important thing you could do was stand between a terrified child and violence. Even when courts said you shouldn't, even when lawyers called you criminals, even when it complicated your life beyond recognition. You stood. You protected. You refused to walk away. That was family. That was brotherhood. That was what happened when a little girl in a Denny's parking lot whispered, "Daddy hurts me." And a biker who'd survived the same hell whispered back, "Stand next to me and call me Dad." And meant it. 6 months after Judge Morrison's ruling, Tampa settled into the kind of humid summer that made Floridians question their life choices, but Josh Coleman barely noticed the heat as he sat in the Hells Angels clubhouse watching Tricia color at the same table where they'd voted to protect her half a year ago. Marcus's parental rights hadn't been terminated. Family courts moved slow even with documented abuse, but his visitation had been reduced to 2 supervised hours monthly at a facility where therapists watched and documented every interaction. The psychological evaluation had been devastating. Marcus showed narcissistic tendencies, difficulty with empathy, and patterns consistent with emotional abuse. His supervised visits had become performative nightmares where he tried to convince therapists he was the victim while Tricia sat silent, counting minutes until she could leave. Eventually, even Marcus's expensive lawyers admitted the optics were unsalvageable. By month 4, he'd stopped showing up to visits. By month 5, his lawyer filed paperwork essentially abandoning the custody fight. By month 6, Stephanie's lawyer filed for full legal and physical custody with no opposition. The judge granted it in a hearing that lasted 11 minutes. Tricia was legally, fully, permanently safe from the man who'd spent 6 years terrorizing her. Josh had expected relief. Instead, he felt something more complicated: purpose. Because protecting Tricia hadn't ended with courtroom victories. It had evolved into something neither he nor Stephanie had planned, but both had grown into: family. Not the family defined by biology or marriage certificates, but the family built by showing up every day, by teaching a 6-year-old, now 7, that adults could be trusted, that men could be gentle, that fathers were supposed to protect, not destroy. Josh taught Tricia to ride a bicycle in Lowry Park, running beside her, holding the seat until she found her balance and pedaled away screaming with joy. Taught her that falling was part of learning, that scrapes healed, that fear was okay as long as you got back up. Attended her school plays, where she played a flower in a production of Alice in Wonderland, sitting in the audience beside Stephanie, while 17 tattooed bikers filled the back row and cheered louder than anyone when Tricia took her bow. Fixed the perpetually broken dishwasher in Stephanie's apartment, then the leaking faucet, then the AC unit, until it became easier to just be there most evenings, sharing dinners that felt less like obligation and more like belonging. Stephanie had healed too, shedding the exhausted terror that had defined her for years and rediscovering the person she'd been before Marcus. She'd started classes at Hillsborough Community College, studying paralegal work because someone needs to help women navigate the system that failed me. Started smiling more, laughing, building a life where fear wasn't the default emotion. And somewhere in the shared dinners and fixed appliances and school plays, Josh and Stephanie had fallen into something that looked like love. Not dramatic, not cinematic. Just the quiet recognition that they'd become partners in protecting the person they both loved most. 3 weeks ago, Josh had moved his stuff into Stephanie's apartment in Seminole Heights. Not because courts required it, not because Tricia needed a father figure, though she'd been calling him Dad without the pretend qualifier for months. But because when you found family, you didn't walk away. When you found home, you stayed. Tonight, at the clubhouse celebration of Tricia's 7th birthday and the legal finalization of Stephanie's full custody, Brick raised his beer in a toast. To Josh, who saw a kid in trouble and didn't look away. To Stephanie, who fought a system designed to break her. And to Tricia, who taught us that family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up when monsters come calling. 17 bikers raised glasses. Tricia raised her juice box. And Josh felt the weight of 35 years of surviving his own childhood finally transform into something that looked like redemption. Later, as the party wound down and Tricia fell asleep on a clubhouse couch surrounded by biker jackets used as blankets, Stephanie pulled Josh aside. "I never thanked you properly. For that day. For standing between her and Marcus when you had every reason to walk away." "Didn't have a reason to walk away," Josh said. "Had 35 years of reasons to stay." Stephanie kissed him, gentle, grateful. The kind of kiss that said, "Thank you for saving us, and I love you, and we're home now." She wants to know if you'll adopt her, officially, legally. Not just Dad in practice, but Dad on paperwork. Josh felt his throat tighten. "What do you want?" "I want the man who's been showing up every day for 7 months to keep showing up for the next 70 years. I want Tricia to have the father she deserves. I want us to be a family not just because we survived Marcus, but because we chose each other." Then, yes. The paperwork was filed Monday, the adoption hearing scheduled for September. And on a humid Tampa morning 3 months later, Judge Morrison, the same judge who'd protected Tricia from Marcus, signed the papers that made Joshua Coleman legally, officially, permanently Tricia's father. In the courtroom, surrounded by Hell's Angels in their colors and Stephanie in a dress she'd bought special, Tricia climbed into Josh's lap and asked the question that had started everything. "Am I allowed to call you Dad now? For real? Forever?" Josh looked at this 7-year-old who'd stood beside him in a parking lot and trusted a stranger to protect her, who'd taught him that surviving childhood trauma qualified you to prevent it in others, who'd transformed his understanding of fatherhood from biology to choice. "Sweetheart, you've been calling me Dad for a year, but now it's official. Now the state of Florida agrees with what we already knew. You're my daughter, not because we share blood, because we chose each other." Tricia hugged him with the fierce intensity of children who'd learned that love required courage. "I'm glad I stood next to you that day. I'm glad I pretended. Me too, baby. Me too." As they left the courthouse, strange family formed by violence, intervention, and the stubborn refusal to let systems fail children, Josh thought about Fort Myers, about the parking lots where nobody had intervened for him, about his father who'd died 5 years ago without ever apologizing, about the IED in Kandahar that should have killed him but instead had taught him that surviving meant something when you used your survival to protect others. He'd been that terrified kid once. Now he was the father he'd needed back then, and somewhere in Tampa, Marcus Bennett lived alone in his condo, estranged from the daughter he'd lost through cruelty, learning the hard lesson that ownership wasn't love, and court orders couldn't force children to feel safe with monsters. The story didn't end with revenge or reconciliation. It ended with a 7-year-old girl sleeping peacefully in a home where fathers kneeled when they talked, where men protected instead of destroyed, where calling someone Dad was earned through showing up every single day. It ended with a former Ranger understanding that the most important mission he'd ever complete wasn't in Afghanistan. It was in a Denny's parking lot on a Sunday morning when he'd chosen intervention over comfort. It ended with 17 Hell's Angels proving that brotherhood meant more than chrome and leather. It meant standing between innocence and violence, even when courts said you shouldn't. And it ended with Josh the Ripper Coleman, who'd earned his road name by refusing to die, learning that the best way to honor survival was to ensure other children didn't have to be as strong as he'd been. Because real dads protected, real dads showed up. Real dads knelt down and said, "Stand next to me and call me Dad," and meant it forever. That was family. That was love. That was what happened when a biker looked at a terrified child and saw, if you believe that real fathers are defined not by biology, but by who shows up when a child whispers, "He scares me," and that sometimes 6 words, "Stand next to me and call me Dad," can transform strangers into family and survivors into protectors. Like and share this story. Subscribe now for more stories of brotherhood, courage, and the kind of intervention that changes lives when everyone else pretends not to see. Also check out the 2 videos showing on the screen right now, specially crafted for you. Himself and refuse to let history repeat, to let